Hello, welcome back to Parts and Politics. It is Sunday, March 22nd, and on Sundays we usually have a bit of a leisurely morning. One of the things I think we both like to do is read the New York Times. I always read the morning newsletter, and on Sundays I tend to catch up with all of the ones that I missed during the week. So it's a little bit of a barrage of news all at once. And I try to balance it out by reading like the real estate articles and read some things about the new movie Project Hail Mary because we went and saw that last night. We loved the book and
That was
wanted to
good.
see the movie. Yeah. But hearing so much news at once, I think takes a toll. So I had asked Tom this morning after we were reading the news for a while how he was doing, and he said he noticed feeling really sad. And I said, oh, maybe it's time to record another Parts and Politics and just check in with the parts. So first of all, do you want to give a little update of where things are at politically today?
Yeah. Specifically, I'm feeling sad about the war in Iran. And so to just kind of give a status update of what things look like as of, March 22nd, we have the Gerald Ford sailing back to the United States. That's our most advanced aircraft carrier. And basically, the Trump administration extended their deployment by a few months, and they should have been home getting like refurbished, but they went to Venezuela to overthrow Maduro there. Then they went straight to Iran to start bombing the Iranians. And one of the things that happens is that like you just can't run a ship 100% all the time. Things are bound to break. And so what happened on the Ford is there was a fire in the laundry room. Took 30 hours to put it out. And so now the ship is basically unusable for anything until it gets refurbished. So it's on its way back.
And this is a ship with active military personnel on it?
Yes. Yeah. And, everyone knew that something like this would happen with this kind of, operational tempo. But, that's just not something that people in DC seem to have any kind of visibility or concern about. So the inevitable happened. The other thing that's happening is that the Strait of Hormuz is closed to tanker traffic. The only ships that are getting through basically have to pay Iran for safe passage. And so there are hundreds of ships in the Persian Gulf that are filled with sailors who can't get on or off their ships. They can't dock. They're running out of food and water. And, these are the people that keep the entire world economy running with oil, with fertilizer, with trade. Um, and I think for me, this is a lesson in how unprepared we were as a country to start a war with Iran. And when Trump was asked, like, did you know that Iran was going to respond by like bombing all these oil refineries of its Arab neighbors? And Trump said, no, no one told me about that. And to me, that's incredibly interesting as like, how can no one in his orbit know that's what Iran was going to do? Like, I knew about it, like they should have known. And it's probably evidence of the deep, deep harm that was done by the Doge cuts. Allegedly the people who were part of like following oil responses and policy in the State Department were cut by Doge, for instance. The other thing that it shows is that as an administration, they cull capable people in favor of people who are loyal. And so they're really at a point now where, um, there is no one, there are no adults left in the room. They've all left because they know that they can't keep their integrity and work for this administration. So it's an incredibly depressing time to care about the US government and its quality, and also realize that the cost of our abandonment of our values is harm done to people in the Middle East. So, yeah, it's when you put all the things together, you're like, man, there are a lot of dominoes falling, and it's only going to go faster from here. So it's,
It makes me think of we were before the movie last night, we had dinner with the friends that we went to the movie with, and we see them, we probably have a dinner with them like once a month or so. And kind of every time we're like, wow, things have gotten even worse, even worse in the world than, the month before. And it's almost like not a funny joke, but almost like a joke at this point of like, well, things can't get much worse, right? But then it's like, no, of course they can and will. And every month when we get together and talk over dinner, things have in fact gotten astronomically more worse in ways that no one could have predicted. It's interesting, I know I shared last time one reason that I wanted to do this podcast is, I enjoy learning about kind of the big picture political things that I don't really think about. So I had not thought about the Doge cuts being related to the fact that we're at war now and that people who would have cautioned against war, not that they may have been listened to, but that those people might not even be there anymore. I mean, I think we all feel the impact of having a president who doesn't seem to think about long-term consequences. One of the quotes I read this morning in a Times article about the war was Trump saying that, we'll spend whatever it takes to be at the tipsy top, which is just, literally sounds like you're 3 years old and your objective is to be at the tipsy top. And you'll spend however many billions of dollars it requires to do that. And then there was an article about, that the United States has sold $23 billion of um, war weapons to other countries this week in order to fund our war. And of course, a thought I had was, who is thinking about the long-term implications of that? What will those countries do with that $23 billion worth of weapons? It's such short-term thinking. And talking about the Doge cuts made me realize, oh, maybe no one actually did think about that. Maybe no one, as part of the decision to make that sale, thought if okay, so we get $23 billion today, which what funds the war for 23 more days, because they're spending about approximately $1 billion a day on this war. So that short-term decision to fund the war for 23 more days, what kind of long-term impact will that have? Not just even necessarily in our lifetime, but the ripple effects of that for a very long time. It's incredibly disheartening.
It is. And just in terms of short-term thinking, like these are my predictions that of things that are going to happen because it's not hard to put things together. Currently, with the Gerald Ford selling back to the US, they need to replace some of the combat capability because they don't have enough manpower. The US military doesn't have enough manpower to both attack Iran and defend shipping. And so they're sailing in what are called Marine Expeditionary Units. It's basically each is has about 2,500 Marines on it, and they're like a little mini aircraft carrier and like all the logistics that go along with supporting Marines. And like these are intended to be used as like short-term, like rapid response kind of interventions that are available around the world, which is incredibly cool. It is not having sending them to Iran to occupy Iranian territory is not what they're intended for. There's not enough like there's not enough manpower. Um, so I am dreading the idea that we're going to be putting boots on the ground in Iran. It looks like we're probably going to be occupying one of the islands in the Persian Gulf called Karg. It is the terminal of where 90% of the oil in Iran goes to. And so I guess the idea is that we're going to start stealing Iranian oil and selling it ourselves, provided we could get it out of the Strait of Hormuz, which is still an open question. But yeah, so apparently the Marines are probably going to be involved in some kind of operation there. And like, great, they can get in. How do you get out?
Mm.
And it's just depressing that we are headed on this road of escalation. And, for just being completely straight and honest about politics, like, you know, the goal for Israel is to have a failed state in Iran. That's not what our goal is. But we don't have any strategic goals ourselves. So we're kind of defaulting to like whatever the fuck Israel wants. And so if that means, creating a failed state in the Middle East, the only people that serves are the extremists and the Israeli government.
And I think talking about the oil makes me think of, here in the US, I think one of the only ways that we stay connected to the fact that there's a war happening, unless you have friends or family who are serving in the military, is through the rising price of gas. And that when you're, at the pump and you're paying for something a gallon, which is what it is here, um, that then you remember, oh, right, that's because we're at war. And of course, I know the Trump administration keeps saying it doesn't, want Americans to pay more at the pump. And so they're doing all these things, including another article I read this morning is about, I mean, you were talking about potentially we'll even steal Iranian oil, but buying Iranian oil, which is so insane to think of going to war with a country, bombing them, killing their leaders, but still buying their oil, so that your constituents won't be angry about the price of gas. And, here in the United States, I think we're feeling it the least, as is probably always the case. I know people in France who are saying that they can't even get oil to heat their home because of the shortages, because of the war. So here we started a war in the United States, in Iran, none of which has anything to do with France, and yet they, and I'm sure many other people across the world, are the ones who can't heat their homes because literally there is no fuel available to do that.
Yeah. Truly, they did not consent to the chaos that we're causing.
And I'm sure anyone listening is thinking, well, neither did I, and neither neither did we. We didn't consent to this chaos either. But I think we do have to take some responsibility just in being Americans.
Yeah.
So, it's overwhelming, it's depressing, but let's check in with our parts because I do think you and I both believe that's the way through anything in the moment. It's not the big picture answer to things, but it is the small picture in the moment. How do I get through this moment with integrity? So maybe we could start by noticing your sad parts. Does that feel okay?
It does.
Okay. Well, I'm a big believer in finding it in our bodies, and that's where IFS starts. The first F is find. So maybe you could find the sadness and where it's living in your body right now.
I feel it living mostly in my chest. It's like a compression there. And also just like a tightness in my throat too.
Does it feel okay? I noticed you bringing your hand there. Does it feel okay to maybe gently leave a hand there at your chest or at your throat just to let the sadness know that you're with it?
Yeah, honestly, that feels good.
Okay. Well, maybe just holding that for a moment. Again, letting the sadness know you're with it, not trying to move it, not judging it in any way, just bringing loving awareness. And in IFS, this is the focus on F. So our first F is to find it, and then we focus on it. And so focusing on it for as long as feels good, but when you're ready, perhaps moving to the next F, which is to flesh it out. Just noticing what that sadness might be telling you, what you might notice about it. It could be words, images, emotions, body sensations, anything at all.
It's interesting in that I was not expecting to like cry in front of a camera, but truly I am starting to tear up just thinking about the sadness that I'm feeling. And it feels good to cry and to just experience what the feeling is as a sensation. And for me, it's not just about Iran. It also connects to the people of Gaza and that connects to the people of Ukraine. Of There are so many people who are the victims of colonization and empire, and the imperial age has never ended, I guess. Um, we just have chosen to stop calling ourselves an empire, but we continue to act like one.
We'll see if it feels okay to just honor those tears, to really invite them to take up as much room as they need. And as you said, tears for the people of Iran, the people of Gaza, the people of Ukraine. I know this came up last time too, but I can't think about imperialism and colonialism without thinking of the people who lived here on this land and who were killed and raped and evicted from their homes. And I've even been thinking a lot lately about our Irish ancestors, just because it was just St. Patrick's Day, and I wrote a blog reflecting on ancestral trauma, and even our Irish ancestors were evicted from their homes and killed in genocide by colonization. It's just the ongoing ripple effect of power and greed. And I think being sad about that matters.
Yeah, and I'm just noticing that there's not a lot of opportunity in our culture to like share grief with other people.
Mm. Yeah, that's true. Tell me more about that.
Well, instead of like being a collective village that, experiences everything together and, can process it, we're all like little appendages and like I think of like spider legs. And we're all at the end of these different legs and we're all part of this like big machine that's moving,
Mm.
but we're not connected to each other. We're connected to the machine. We're connected to each other like through this machine,
Mm.
this, hyper capitalist, you know, colonized society that we've been born into and are perpetuating.
Yeah.
And so that person to person connection just feels limited.
Mhm.
And maybe that's just a male thing of like, I know it's men tend to not have as many emotional connections.
Well, like I feel like I spend a lot of time with grief just because I'm a therapist, and in all therapy, especially the work I do, which is intensive trauma therapy, there's always grief beneath it. But every week when I'm holding that grief with a new person, it's so clear that they've almost never done that before. And
Hmm.
mostly I see women, so I don't think it's exclusive to men. I think even though people who are socially conditioned as women are, maybe they have an easier time with a lot of emotion, I think universally people really struggle with grief. And I think part of that is because grief, like there's nothing beneath grief. Grief is so pure. Like when you reach grief, it's almost like rock bottom in a way. And we hate that. Like humans hate being with that rock bottom feeling of there's nothing to do with this except feel it.
Yeah.
Nobody wants that. Nobody wants to feel something so horrible and know that there's nothing to do with it except feel it.
Yeah.
And I'm really proud of you for feeling it. No.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I think there's the will to power of like wanting to have agency that feels offended at the idea of a grief that we can't do anything about other than just experience it and accept it.
Exactly. Which I don't want to like move past this quickly at all, but it does make me think of the F of befriending your grief,
Hmm.
which for anybody who's not aware, it is kind of funny that that F is actually not an F word, it's befriend, but sometimes I'll just say friend. Um, and I do think befriending grief means feeling it. So it's not a way to move past it, but just to think about it in a different way, maybe for anyone who, tries to like heal their grief, but like what would it look like to actually befriend grief? And I know that's a journey you've been on for years, really. And it's a journey I was forced to take, years ago, and a journey that never ends, I don't think, for any of us. But in this moment or today or this week, what do you think befriending grief would look like for you?
It's hard. It's hard. Like I truly believe in like, professionalism and like things like that. And I think it's it would be nice to share grief with more people, I guess. And it's just everyone is so busy and everyone is carrying so much of their own personal grief in a way. And I guess right now I'm just feeling the lack of community about this issue specifically. Because like I have people I can share our grief with about the state of our own country, but I don't feel that community of people that like truly understand what's happening in the world
Mm,
and can process that in an emotionally intelligent way.
mm, mm. I'm not exactly sure I understand what you mean about the professionalism thing. So there's something like that blocks you from.
Yeah, I thought, no, I thought, how we have to like kind of dissociate a little bit to
Mm,
like
okay.
for like work and
Okay.
other kinds of relationships. But as I was talking it through, I realized no, it's not just work relationships. It's like all of my relationships that I don't have this kind of outlet in, and that's just kind of me talking through of like realizing there is this emotional grieving, and I have lots of great communities that I'm a part of, and I really enjoy and appreciate them. But maybe there's another type of community that would be helpful for me to connect with.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like you're really feeling these global things. And like I think one of our most important communities, but especially yours, is our local political action group. But it does focus very much on local politics. And not that people don't care about the global ones, they do. But they're also, to some extent, so burnt out on working so hard at the local level. Um, so yeah, I could see how you're really missing that connection about more global grief.
Yeah. And it makes sense in terms of, if you want to make a difference in the world, you do act locally.
Yeah.
And so, like, with people who are concerned about local issues, coming together not only shares the grief, but it also helps organize action. And so sharing grief about a global issue is a little bit harder because it's harder to channel that energy into action, which is, I think, an important outgrowth of grief a lot of times.
Yes, it is, but I also think it's so important to not jump to action and in so doing avoid just being with the grief.
Hmm.
And it sounds like there's something inside of you that's longing for that grief to be shared more collectively. And maybe that would eventually lead to action, but also what would it look like to just share grief with others that didn't have to move to action, but that could really just honor the grief itself.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because, like, I can feel in myself when I'm touching grief, like, I could be with it and cry a little bit, but I just notice myself moving on quickly to, like, kind of analytically understand it and analytically integrate it.
Definitely.
And the same thing with like turning grief into action of like we're trying to metabolize grief so quickly.
Yeah.
And I do see the value of like a space where you can just be in grief with
Yeah.
other people and not necessarily need anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's important.
Yeah.
Mm. How are you feeling towards your grief right now? I know there's that little bit of a desire to move on from it, to move to action, but as you notice to come back to it, how do you feel towards it?
I feel compassion towards my grief. It's, a genuine grief and grief comes about because there are things that we love and things that we value. And if we didn't have either of those, we wouldn't have grief or experience it the way we do. So I'm
Yeah,
grateful for it.
I'm grateful for it too, and I'm glad you pointed us back there because I do think that's so true that grief and love are opposite sides of the same coin. I'm curious what your grief is pointing you to in terms of what it is that you love that you're losing right now or scared of losing,
Yeah.
particularly when you think about Iran and Gaza and Ukraine.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's just so much grief knowing of how many innocent bystanders are being impacted by us. And like we're always the heroes of our own stories. And to feel like you're part of a collective villainy in a larger story, that's a tough reality and narrative to inhabit.
Yeah, that hit me right then when you said we're always the heroes of our own stories. Because, yes, that also means that sometimes as Americans we're the villains. But it made me think about like when you're a kid, I don't actually know at what age this happens, but like when you start to understand that every person is experiencing life the way that you experience life, like when you move past egocentrism and you realize like for every other human being in the entire world, every single one of the 7 billion of them, they see life through their own eyes and in their own shoes the way that you do. And that's when you start to develop empathy. And that's, I think, part of why this grief is so huge, because when you feel empathy and think of people who are living in war that they did not choose and that they have no responsibility or blame for, that can it can be unbearable. It can be the empathy can be so huge and unbearable. And I also believe that we have to let ourselves feel it. Like, of course, we are so fortunate to be able to dissociate it from it sometimes, whether it's at work or on Instagram or whatever it is, like TV, but to keep coming back to it, that is the reality for so many people right now.
Yeah. And I just want to address people that think that what we're doing over there is righteous in some way. And maybe they'll point to like a video clip of like Iranians celebrating. Like it's like just like with Venezuela, the regime was not a good regime, and there's a lot of suffering that they caused. But living in our country, like the empire is only ever going to show you the joy of the collaborators, not the suffering of the colonized people. And to just have a little bit of awareness and humility of like, of course, we're being presented with like the most glamorous possible take on what our actions over there are really doing. And to just have a little bit of skepticism. Like, this is not our first rodeo of attacking a Middle East country. Like, every time this blows up in ways that we can't even dream about. So just, I would encourage you to have some skepticism.
That's what we talked about in the last time that we did this, is being able to hold that two things can be true at once, that people can be glad about a evil regime ending and not want to be at war. That both of those things can be true at once. So I think probably what will just keep coming up against every time we make one of these is how hard it is to really be with our feelings, because it is hard to be with two opposite things at once, and it's even harder to be with grief, and it might be even harder to be with empathy when people are being so harmed. And all of these things are hard and don't have an answer. And we're not here to try to give an answer. We're just here to try to be honest about what the parts are that come up for us about this, in hopes that, of course, it encourages you to notice your parts and what comes up for them. And maybe it's similar to our parts. Maybe you have grief. Maybe you don't know what to do with how painful empathy can be right now. And really, we're not even hoping to offer solutions in this. We're just hoping to offer space to notice. I say all the time, the most important word in healing trauma is notice. It's not about arriving at a destination or a solution. It's just about being honest in the process. So thanks for letting us be honest in our process today.
Yeah, thank you so much for staying with us. And if you're on YouTube, and you want to leave a comment about the grief that you're experiencing over this, I'd be happy to read that because I know there's just not a lot of spaces for that. So I just wanted to offer that.
It probably would actually feel really good to you to connect with
Yeah.
other people's grief.
But thank you all so much for listening, and we'll see you again next time.
We'll see you next time. Bye.